Welcome to True Crime Expert, where we unravel the chilling details behind some of the darkest crimes in small-town America. Today, we uncover the dark secrets behind a sheriff's secret affair with a teen girl that takes a deadly turn. This hidden relationship leads to a grisly murder, shocking the community and leaving many questions unanswered. Come explore the unsettling specifics of this terrifying case and its startling ramifications. When Rebecca Becky Caldwell passed away, she was 18 years old. She had been raised in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, a place where life was difficult and options were limited. Becky had a difficult upbringing filled with family issues and financial hardships. Joe Ray Caldwell, her father, had a history of criminal behavior and alcohol abuse, although he was currently battling liver cancer. In order to support him, Becky had assumed the job of caregiver and put in a lot of overtime. She had no intention of going to college, despite having graduated from Pine Bluff High School in 2011. Instead, she began working as a dancer at the Honey Pot, a local club that catered to tougher groups as soon as she graduated. Becky didn't have a dream job, but it allowed her to dream of a better life and paid the bills. She met Sheriff Dave Pringles, a married man 34 years her senior, at the Honey Pot. In Pine Bluff, Dave was well known and well respected. Years of service as the county sheriff. He fell head over heels for Becky the moment he laid eyes on her. They soon developed a covert friendship once he began going to the club on a regular basis. Dave lavished Becky with money and attention, which she felt was an escape from her harsh reality. He assisted her with rent, purchased pricey presents for her, and even covered her father's expenses at the strip club. However, there were conditions associated with the association. Although Becky relished the money advantages, she quickly started to feel confined by Dave's domineering and possessive behavior. Even so, with Dave controlling so much of her life, she couldn't bring herself to go. One night at the club, Dave's wife Pauline Pringles confronted Becky, which changed the course of events. Pauline had followed her husband to the Honey Pot after becoming suspicious of his actions. In front of other dancers, she approached Becky and accused her of destroying her marriage. Becky attempted to deny everything out of embarrassment and fear, but Pauline wasn't persuaded. Becky was extremely shaken by the encounter and felt guilty and ashamed. After that night, she started to cut off her relationship with Dave, but he wouldn't let her go so easy. Becky told a close friend in the final days of her life that she wanted to leave Pine Bluff and start over, far from the complex web of lies she had fallen into. She envisioned escaping her difficult history and relocating to a large city, perhaps Little Rock or Memphis. However, her life was cruelly interrupted before she could take that jump. Sheriff Dave Pringles contacted 911 at approximately 9:30 a.m. on January 28, 2012, after discovering a body at his home office. That body belonged to his mistress, 18-year-old Rebecca Becky Caldwell. She was slumped over his desk with a revolver in her hand, according to the sheriff. It appeared that Becky had killed herself with his service wagon, he informed the 911 operator, suffering a deadly gunshot wound to the head. In Pine Bluff, Arkansas, a peaceful suburban community where such occurrences were uncommon, Becky's body was discovered inside Dave Pringles' house. In the back of the house was the office, a little space crammed with police enforcement artifacts. Sheriff Pringles himself greeted first responders when they arrived. He told officers that Becky had been dealing with personal issues and had probably committed suicide. He looked upset yet calm. Marcus Burks, a sheriff's deputy, was the first to enter the room where Becky's body was discovered. Later, he called the scene unnerving. There was a puddle of blood on the floor beneath Becky's chair, and her head was lying on the desk with her body slumped forward. Her hand was close to the sheriff's service gun. It did appear to be a blatant suicide to the untrained eye. Burke spoke of a feeling of incredulity. How could a young person disappear so quickly? But Burke spotted a few odd details when he looked around the room more. Becky's wrists were clearly bruised, but there were no indications of a struggle. Additionally, Deputy Burks noticed ligature marks around Becky's ankles, which led him to believe that she may have been confined prior to her passing. He was also uncomfortable with the gunshot's angle. Becky couldn't possibly have shot herself from that vantage point. Burke sensed something wasn't right, even though he had a personal relationship with the sheriff. He informed the investigative team of his worries after recording the scene and getting in touch with the coroner. This was not a straightforward suicide. The story was not over yet. Pine Bluff was shocked to learn about Becky's body. It was difficult for anyone who knew her to accept that the disobedient young lady with escape-oriented fantasies had died in the sheriff's home office. The community prepared for a protracted and intricate investigation as word of the occurrence spread. Questions were raised by the situation as soon as Pine Bluff police arrived to Sheriff Dave Pringle's residence on January 28, 2012. Deputy Marcus Burks was among the officers that thought Rebecca Becky Caldwell's death was more complicated than a straightforward suicide. But others believed the sheriff's claim that Becky had committed suicide without question. The crew was split. Some investigators supported Dave's claim, while others questioned it because of the odd elements. Forensic specialists were promptly summoned by the police to investigate Becky's body. A thorough autopsy by the specialists turned out some startling information. Becky's wrists were bruised, which may indicate that she was restrained before to her passing. This idea was supported by the ligament marks on her ankles. The suicide claim is called into question by these findings. The fact that Becky had had sex just before she passed away was even more disturbing. The situation became even more complicated when forensic tests revealed she had not been sexually assaulted. Sheriff Pringles became concerned about the consequences as the inquiry progressed. In Pine Bluff, he was regarded with respect. Given his reputation for upholding law and order, the discovery of his 18-year-old mistress dead in his home office was a scandal waiting to happen. Dave took action to save his reputation by using his influence. He allegedly bought off local media outlets to keep the darker aspects of the story from being reported. In the days after the tragedy, news stories were ambiguous, concentrating on Becky's tumultuous past and speculating that her death might have been the unfortunate consequence of personal problems. Not everyone, though, was prepared to remain silent. A few Facebook profiles and local nonprofit blogs that are not connected to the mainstream media dared to challenge the narrative. They brought up the peculiar circumstances of Becky's passing, such as her covert liaison with the sheriff. Even as the official version grew more hazy by the day, these smaller publications, which lacked the resources of larger newspapers, remained crucial in informing the public. The police force became more tense as the probe went on. While some cops felt compelled to turn a blind eye, others thought the sheriff was concealing something. This case was obviously going to be difficult to conclude, and when additional evidence surfaced, the division within the police only grew. In Pine Bluff, Arkansas, Sheriff Dave Pringles had established a solid reputation as a strict law enforcement officer and a devout Christian family guy. He had been the county sheriff for more than 10 years and was well known for his tough approach to crime. He frequently spoke in public about the value of family values in law enforcement. Dave, his wife Pauline, and their 3 kids were spotted sitting in the front pew of the local First Baptist Church every Sunday. Many people in the neighborhood held him in high regard for his commitment to his job and his rigorous observance of the law. Pine Bluff was rocked by the discovery of Becky Caldwell's body in his home office because of this. Dave quickly distanced himself from the 18-year-old girl when authorities asked him about Becky's death. In order to preserve his reputation as a devout Christian, Dave adamantly denied ever having a love or sexual relationship with Becky. He claimed to detectives that she had been stalking him for months and had even made up stories about them having sex. Dave claims that after they had met briefly at a community service event he had planned at the neighborhood strip club where she worked, Becky had developed an obsession with him. As a God-fearing man, Dave told the cops, he would never cheat on his wife, much less with a young person like Becky. He explained that Becky had been contacting him all day and night and showing up at his office nude. However, he asserted that he had consistently rejected her. In an attempt to further undermine Becky's mental stability, Dave said that he had previously attended a psychology course at a nearby community college. Dave claimed that he was certain Becky had bipolar disorder and perhaps other mental health conditions based on what he had learned in that session. He continued by telling investigators that Becky had been suicidal in the months before her murder and had displayed symptoms of being, quote, off her rocker. Investigators couldn't verify a lot of Dave's statements, despite his claims. There were no records of Becky receiving treatment for any mental health conditions, and there was no proof to back up the stalker story. Becky had never mentioned stalking Dave or being obsessed with him to her friends or coworkers. At first, Dave's reputation as a devout Christian allowed him to keep his innocence intact, but as the investigation went on, holes began to appear in his account. Police learned an important fact that complicated the case as the inquiry progressed. Dave's wife, Pauline Pringles, was there in the home when Becky Caldwell was killed. Pauline hadn't been suspected at first, but this information brought up new issues. Pauline acknowledged being home the night Becky died when questioned by detectives, but she said she had little memory of the events. Pauline told authorities that a mix of booze and prescription drugs caused her to faint on the living room carpeting. She clarified that in order to deal with the stress of her husband's adultery, she had started taking drugs, both legal and illicit, in recent months. Pauline acknowledged that she had found it difficult to cope with Dave's affair with Becky's emotional toll. When Pauline learned that Dave was having sex with a much younger lady, her life fell apart after years of helping her husband in his work. She began taking her doctor's prescribed anxiety and sleeping pills, but when those failed to sufficiently reduce the discomfort, she resorted to additional drugs. In order to assist her dull the ongoing feelings of betrayal, Pauline acknowledged taking medications she had received from a friend and occasionally combining them with wine. Pauline confessed that the moment she overheard Dave and Becky having sex was the pivotal moment. She confronted her husband about his affair after being broken by this incident. Pauline felt stuck in a marriage that no longer resembled the partnership they had once shared, even though Dave had pleaded for forgiveness and promised to break things up. She felt humiliated and enraged when she learned of Dave's betrayal. The man she had dedicated her life to left her feeling abandoned. Pauline told the police she had never wished Becky any harm, even if she was furious. Pauline claims that although she had addressed Becky a few days prior to the murder, it was not with the purpose of threatening her. Pauline stated that she had visited Becky's workplace, a strip club, to urge her to turn to Christ and stop having an affair with Dave. Pauline stated that she had begged Becky to take a different route, one that did not include ruining the family. Pauline vowed that despite the heated argument, it had not gone beyond words. Police questioned Pauline's involvement in that night's events after she made certain statements. She presented herself as a distraught wife who had resorted to drugs as a coping mechanism for her husband's adultery, but her presence in the home and her interaction with Becky prompted questions. Without other proof, investigators were unable to conclusively connect Pauline to the murder, but they did question if her rage and drug-induced haze might have caused her to do something she couldn't recall. Pauline remained at the center of the investigation, but it was challenging to determine the specifics of what had transpired that evening due to her drug usage and memory problems. When detectives learned of Sheriff Dave Pringles' troubling past, the inquiry took a sharp turn. Detectives discovered a startling twist while first concentrating on Pauline and the potential suicide of Becky Caldwell. As they dug deeper into Dave's past, they discovered evidence that suggested he had manipulated other young women before Becky. In actuality, Dave had a concerning habit of abusing his position of authority to take advantage of weaker women, particularly sex workers and strippers, many of whom were attracted to him because of their challenging personal situations. Text exchanges exchanged between Dave and a number of women were the first pieces of evidence to surface. When detectives learned of Sheriff Dave Pringles' troubling past, the inquiry took a sharp turn. Detectives discovered a startling twist while first concentrating on Pauline and the potential suicide of Becky Caldwell. As they dug deeper into Dave's past, they discovered evidence that suggested he had manipulated other young women before Becky. In actuality, Dave had a concerning habit of abusing his position of authority to take advantage of weaker women, particularly sex workers and strippers, many of whom were attracted to him because of their challenging personal situations. Text exchanges exchanged between Dave and a number of women were the first pieces of evidence to surface. When detectives learned of Sheriff Dave Pringles' troubling past, the inquiry took a sharp turn. Detectives discovered a startling twist while first concentrating on Pauline and the potential suicide of Becky Caldwell. As they dug deeper into Dave's past, they discovered evidence that suggested he had manipulated other young women before Becky. In actuality, Dave had a concerning habit of abusing his position of authority to take advantage of weaker women, particularly sex workers and strippers, many of whom were attracted to him because of their challenging personal situations. Text exchanges exchanged between Dave and a number of women were the first pieces of evidence to surface. These texts exposed a series of unsuitable relationships, many of which were sexually explicit. Becky wasn't the only person he had dated. Numerous late-night calls to young ladies were discovered by investigators in phone records. Some were struggling financially or working at clubs at the age of 18. Dave found it easy to manipulate these ladies because many of them had drug use histories or were from dysfunctional households. Soon after, there were pictures and videos. These photos, which were taken from Dave's personal phone, depict him having sex with multiple women. The majority of them seem to have just graduated from high school. Records of wire transfers and gifts that Dave lavished on these ladies were also discovered by detectives, which further suggests that he had been using his riches and influence to purchase their cooperation or silence. A particular picture of Dave and Becky having sex in a Walmart restroom supported the idea that their relationship had been more than a passing fancy. Dave's response to this incriminating proof was explosive. He was defensive and irate, claiming that the police had made up the accusations against him. He insisted on his innocence, saying he had never exploited anyone and that Becky had been following him. Dave brushed off the pictures and text messages as idle banter or poorly worded jokes. He maintained that he was being persecuted because he was the sheriff and that his connections with these ladies were voluntary. The investigative team's suspicions were only strengthened by his outbursts. For finding this history of exploitation was alarming and infuriating for the cops. Many of them trusted Dave as a community pillar, having known him for years. Many of the officers felt deceived when they discovered that he had been using his power to control young, impressionable women. Detectives were forced to examine Dave's activities in Becky's case more seriously after this discovery, which completely changed the course of the inquiry. Police got many complaints of a man who fit Joe Ray's description wandering near the Pringles home in the days preceding the murder, as the investigation into Becky Caldwell's death progressed. Given his lengthy criminal history, Joe Ray was suspected of being involved in the case. He was a seasoned con artist with a reputation for putting together complex plans to defraud people of their money, according to his arrest history. Joe Ray had a history of arrests for identity theft, fraud, and other schemes. He persuaded others to donate money for fictitious causes by pretending to be a charity organizer, which is one of his most well-known scams. Additionally, he deceived elderly individuals into giving him their possessions, leaving them without money despite promising to assist them with their financial difficulties. His criminal history demonstrated his ability to easily mislead and deceive. Joe Ray denied any involvement in Becky's death when questioned by authorities. He claimed to detectives that he was waiting for Dave to accompany him to a strip club, which is why he had been near the Pringles residence. Joe claimed that he had been in the vicinity to get a ride, and that he and Dave had planned to release some tension. He insisted he wasn't involved in anything unethical and had no knowledge of what had happened to Becky. But investigators quickly discovered another aspect of Joe Ray's dishonesty. Police discovered no medical papers to back up his claim that he had terminal liver cancer, despite the fact that he had been telling everyone, including his daughter and their church congregation, about it. To avoid working and to live off of his daughter and the kind donations from their religious group, Joe had made up the whole sickness. Pretending to fight a sickness he didn't have, he had tricked people into supporting him financially. Joe Ray grew evasive and defensive when challenged with this untruth. He insisted that others had granted him assistance out of kindness and denied that he had done anything illegal. However, his excuses were not accepted by the authorities. They persisted in questioning him, pointing out that he had manipulated people and avoided employment by fabricating a cancer diagnosis. As Joe became aware of the strength of the evidence against him, his facade started to crumble. Being revealed as a common scam was extremely embarrassing for Joe Ray. He had made it his life's work to lie to people, and now the reality was finally getting to him. When police discovered vital evidence that enabled them to apprehend Dave Pringles for Becky Caldwell's murder, the inquiry into her death came to a head. A small caliber handgun was used to shoot Becky at close range, according to forensic analysis. She may have been sitting or kneeling when the fatal shot was fired, based on the angle of the gunshot. Police believe that Becky had been enticed to the Pringles residence, possibly in order to have a conversation, only to be shot by Dave in cold blood. Inconsistencies in Dave's alibi and forensic evidence connecting him to the crime site were what ultimately turned the tide of the inquiry. Investigators discovered fingerprints on the firearm that matched Dave's and gunpowder residue on his clothing. He was at the area during the window of time when Becky was slain, according to surveillance footage from a neighboring petrol station. Even though Dave had previously stated that he hadn't spoken to Becky in days, phone records revealed that he had contacted her many times the night before she passed away. Police continued to collect evidence. After Becky threatened to reveal their affair to the media and his religious community, they came to the conclusion that Dave had shot her in a fit of rage. Dave, a man known for his tough stance on crime and his image as a Christian family man, could not risk his reputation being ruined. He saw Becky as a menace that needed to be eradicated. Dave's response to the police presenting him with the evidence was one of defiance and incredulity. He had spent years crafting a perfect image, and the idea that it could all come crashing down because of one woman enraged him. During his arrest, he maintained his innocence, insisting that Becky had been unstable and had likely taken her own life. However, the physical evidence told a different story, and Dave's protests fell on deaf ears. Pauline, Dave's wife, was devastated by the revelation. The reality that he had killed Becky shattered her. Pauline had previously been battling her own issues and using drugs as a coping mechanism for the adultery. However, she could not have predicted this blow. The guy she believed to be her father and spouse turned out to be a heartless killer. In their town, Dave Pringle's arrest caused a stir. Everyone began to wonder how much they really understood about the man who had formerly lectured about morality and virtue after he was shown to be a murderer. Dave Pringles used a daring and contentious argument during his murder trial by asserting that Becky Caldwell had committed suicide. Additionally, he was being unfairly singled out. Citing Becky's history of drug use and emotional distress about their alleged romance, he argued that she had been mentally ill. This strategy was known as the suicide defense. They have maintained that Becky's death was a tragic suicide and that he had not shot her. Dave attempted to portray himself as a victim of a political plot while defending himself on the witness stand. He alleged that his rivals were exploiting the case to damage his reputation when he was running for sheriff at the time of Becky's passing. He testified that I've always been a harsh cop and a defender of Christian principles. They're pursuing me because of this. Mark Tomlinson, his defense lawyer, contended that political motivations were tainting the investigation and that the evidence against Dave was circumstantial. This claim was refuted by prosecutor Michelle Grayson, who provided the incriminating forensic evidence, such as Dave's fingerprints on the murder weapon and gunshot residue discovered on his clothing, that connected him to the crime. She made it plain that Dave had a purpose. His reputation would have been ruined if Becky had revealed their affair. Dave tried to persuade the jury that he was a victim of political sabotage, but the evidence was too strong. After only 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty conviction for second-degree murder. Dave was indignant at what he perceived as a heinous injustice, according to people close to him, yet he remained expressionless at sentence. He received a sentence of 25 years to life in jail, ending his previously bright future in law enforcement. Dave's wife, Pauline, felt conflicted about the decision. On the one hand, she was glad that Becky's murder had been solved. However, despite his treachery and infidelity, the guy she had spent years with was now going to prison. She experienced a profound feeling of loss, not only for her marriage but also for the life she had previously thought they would lead together. Since many people in their community had believed Dave, the trial and its verdict were shocking. The man who advocated for the integrity of law enforcement and Christian principles was now incarcerated. After the trial, the lives of Dave, Pauline, and Joe Ray took unexpected turns. Dave Pringles was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for the murder of Becky Caldwell. As he began serving his time, he was labeled a pariah among the inmates. His reputation as a tough lawman turned sheriff was shattered, and he faced a harsh reality in prison where the rule of conduct is severe. Meanwhile, Pauline was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. With Dave gone, Pauline found herself navigating her grief and confusion alone. Shortly after the trial, Joe Ray entered her life again. He had been a familiar face during the trial, a man who claimed to be recovering from cancer and in need of support. By deftly stealing Pauline's life funds, he took advantage of her weakness and started to defraud her. He would frequently pretend he had medical bills to pay or solicit donations to aid those in need. Pauline saw that her bank accounts were shrinking over the course of the months, but Joe always had an explanation. He maintained that everything was good and that he was in charge of their money. He was relieved by Pauline, who was in dire need of friendship and confidence. She was oblivious to the fact that she was being betrayed again. The plan didn't start to fall apart until a neighbor who was worried about Joe's actions called the authorities. After looking into Joe Ray's actions, authorities discovered a history of dishonesty, including several allegations of fraud against him in the past. They detained Joe when they linked him to Pauline and her missing money. Pauline was upset and on the verge of going bankrupt when Joe was arrested. The man she had trusted had manipulated her at her most vulnerable. While she had survived the fallout from her marriage to Dave, she now faced a new battle, rebuilding her life from scratch. This shocking turn of events reminded the community of the dangers of trusting too easily. Pauline's story became a cautionary tale about love, trust, and the importance of being vigilant, especially in the wake of betrayal. This case serves as a harrowing reminder that abuse of power often lurks behind the polished exterior of authority figures. Becky's story lives on as a warning and a call for accountability, a reminder that no secret can remain hidden forever. Thank you for listening to True Crime Expert. Hey, True Crime Expert, interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. And do you have any thoughts about this case? Or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate further? Leave us a comment. Stay safe, True Crime Expert. Remember to share, like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you on the following story.